the way this is going to work, we have 4 separate stories or instances of panelists who will be presenting. And I am going to start off putting everybody on mute. And then as you have something you'd like to contribute, I'll have you unmute yourselves and then go from there. Now I'd like to introduce Judy Hellberg. Judy, take it away.
Hi, I'm Judy Hellberg. I'm the president of PHS. I want to welcome you all today. I'm so glad you all came to join us. I know this isn't a kind of a fun topic, but I've seen some of the pictures they were going to show you, and it's a little frightening, but very interesting. For me, you get the ads. We love it that you come to these meetings, but we also have a museum open Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday from 1 to 4 with marvelous docents there to help you out and show you around. And we have, if you've not seen the train, the model train, you need to come and see that. It's worth the trip. It's a marvelous little thing, plus new displays. So please do come and see us Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturday afternoons. Also, I need to ask, if you're not a member, or if you're a member and haven't paid your dues yet, please do that. We do need the money, of course. Doesn't everybody in this day and age? And you can go on to our website and do it on there, or you can send it in, whatever's best for you. If you join as a patron at the $100 of membership, you get to bring a guest with you to the holiday party at the castle. Trust me, it's worth it. It's just such a cool place to have a party. And we'll do that the first Sunday in December. I don't know what that is this year, but we will be there and you will be too. So we would love to see you there. And again, I welcome you all, and I hope you enjoy the program, and I'll give it back to Pat.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Judy. Okay, we're going to begin. And I'm going to have Susan, I think you can unmute yourself, I hope.
Yes.
Very good. Okay, now I'm going to screen share. Okay, I hope that everyone is seeing Susan Stallard from Valamar.
Right.
Picture. Very good. Okay,
Yes.
take it away, Susan.
Okay, so I've lived in Pacifica since the late 70s and in Valamar for a little over 30 years. And one of the things that we in Valamar love are our trees. But branches fall down and trees fall over and that sort of thing. So I'll be showing you some photos. This is actually not a house being hit by a tree, but this is a driveway completely covered with branches. And you can see from the little logo that ABC Channel 7 actually made a video. And this is a snip that I grabbed from the video so that you can see what it looks like. They came up to our street, and my son was saw the truck come up from ABC 7, and he ran to the camera as soon as he saw it. He was a theater minor in college. Anyway, so there was an interview of him, which I did not include it today, but that's the reason that I have this photo here. That's the snip from a presentation that was done by ABC Channel 7, and Vic Lee was doing a presentation. This was Christmas in 2008. And so just to show you that, you know, branches can fall. Also, there were several power lines down for this one. So Patrick, go to the next one. Next thing I wanted to show, see that red enclosed thing? That's a house. That's about all you can see of the house, and all of the tree branches above it crushed this poor little house. And that's the only part that's kind of visible at the time it fell. This is at the corner of Winona and Reina Del Mar. And it was an afternoon, like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon when it fell. And the two people that lived there were both at work, so nobody was home, which was fortunate. The house, the tree came falling down. The tree brought down a telephone pole as well, so the block had no power at all. Anyway, so that was about all you could see. It was lots of tree branches. Okay, now Pat, the next slide.
Okay, you stay.
This is the house 18 months later, still had not been either demolished or rebuilt or anything. So for a year and a half, this poor dilapidated uninhabitable structure was sitting there, visible from Reina del Mar. This happened, the tree fell in 2016, and this picture, like in March in 2016, and this picture is like September of 2017. Apparently there was a lot of discussion between the occupants had been renters, and then there was the owners that lived someplace else, and then there was the city and who was in charge of the tree. And so it took a long time to resolve the financial part of it. Ended up completely leveling the lot and starting from scratch and built a brand new house there. Okay, so next, please. Okay, now this is the biggie. In February of 1994, you can see the Pacifica Tribune headline. There was this really terrible storm, and the tree did fall in Pacifica. I need to give credit to Chris Hunter, was a photographer for both of these photos, and Chris Hunter and Elaine Larson wrote the accompanying story for the Tribune. So I want you to imagine three houses consecutive, A, B, C, right next to each other, and C is on the corner. So house A is where the tree was located. Okay, when it fell, it uprooted, so the bottom and all the tree roots are up in the air. It fell across lot B. The house on lot B was set back, so it was untouched. And lot C is the one that's here in the picture. And the tree completely sliced through the upper story of the two-story house. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. There was a family that lived there. The dad had taken the 4 kids skiing, and the mom was in the back of the house, and so nobody was hurt. Interestingly, this tree was so big that it hit the pickup truck that was parked on the other side of this house. So you got your ABC house, and around the corner, the C is on the corner. Around the corner was a pickup truck that was parked, and it got hit by the branches from the top of the tree. And so you can tell how big this tree was when the base was in A, B never got hit, but it was, had a tree going across it, but there's no damage at all. And then C had this, and then beyond C there was another house that was hit. It was pretty remarkable. In that same storm, also on another part of Valamar, there was, on the right-hand picture, there was also this house where the siding got knocked off, like the whole side of the house got knocked off. So it was pretty dramatic. And that's the tree falls in Valamar.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a second, and people may either put a message in the chat or raise your hands. I'll get you all on the screen so I can see all of you. If anybody has anything to add, any stories, if you were in Valamar in those days.
Gloria?
Gloria, great.
You'd unmute.
I need to unmute and I need to find her.
I unmuted myself.
Oh.
I just have a question. Did that ever get resolved? Is the lot still there, or did anyone move in or out, or what happened?
But
Any follow-up?
the one in 1994, they rebuilt the house that got sliced. The place where the lot got cleared, completely cleared, it was rebuilt, and there's a beautiful house there that, by the way, sold for $2 million. So it's very nice now, but for a while it was kind of an eyesore.
Anyone else? Okay, we're going to move along then. Laura Del Rosso is going to tell us about Shelter Cove and some of the adventures there. I'm going to share my screen.
So I grew up in Lindemar. I grew up at the Peralta Bridge, which we can get into later, the bridge that fell down. I can contribute a little bit about that, but I'm here to talk about Shelter Cove because Pat and I did an exhibit that just went up on Pedro Point and Shelter Cove. And I interviewed two Pacific, from the 1940s, Pacifica residents, Charles and Gary Heiser. Charles is part of the Pacifica family that owned Shelter Cove from 1948 to the late 1970s. So she grew up in Shelter Cove. She's got some amazing stories, and one of them, or two of them, are from two major storms. One was in 1958 and one was in 1960. I mean, these storms were so big that they knocked out a lot of the houses there. And if you all know Shelter Cove, you know there's a whole string of houses. I think about 25 people live out there. And the Pacificas owned, the whole thing. They used to operate the restaurant and the ice cream shop, and it was a little beach resort, right? People came down from San Francisco. So in 1958, the waves came up so high that Gary, at the time, they had just gotten married. He had to actually tie himself to one of the houses so that he wouldn't get swept out to sea. And Cal Hinton, who later became, I think, Pacifica's first fire chief, was helping him out. And so you picture this guy up on a roof tied to the house so he wouldn't be swept out. I mean, at that point, all of the houses were flooded. I think a couple were destroyed. But the bigger storm came in 1960, and in that one, it was just horrendous, and many of the houses were destroyed at that point. The Pacificas ended up selling Shelter Cove in 1978 to Jim Telligan. I think a lot of people, old timers in Pacifica, remember Jim Telligan. He had a real estate company, and he had Shelter Cove. This is the Heiser family up on the screen as they were cleaning up after those big storms. Sorry, Pat, do you want to show the other pictures from that family?
Okay, I'm going to be advancing that, Laura. Go back.
Okay. Yeah, that was the other thing is as we all know, the ocean is very powerful. So the boulders that were coming up on the beach were enormous. And so they were lifting and they were hitting. One of the houses was thrown up against the hill, Gary said, was actually thrown up, picked up by the waves and thrown against the hillside, which was just an amazing thing to see. I mean, these were cabins that were built years ago. I mean, they weren't like had strong foundations or anything, but these were little beach cabins, but people did live there and they still do, which brings us to the bigger storms that we probably know about, because as most people are aware, this is an amazing little place because it's probably one of the most isolated communities in the whole Bay Area. I mean, it's not reachable by car anymore, and that is because in the early 1980s, of course, the storms were incredibly bad, and I guess we'll talk about that in terms of the Lindemar floods. The road to Shelter Cove was the old Ocean Shore Railroad roadbed, and so people, of course, when it was a beach resort, that's how people got to Shelter Cove, and that's how the residents got there. In 1983, most of the road collapsed and it was eroded. So the people who lived there then became incredibly isolated. They had a trail for a while. They could go on foot to their houses on the trail along the roadbed. But as the years went by, even that got swept away and got eroded. So for the last 30 years or so, the only way in and out is up and down, very steep staircase, about 140 stairs. People go up and down with flashlights and carry their groceries and backpacks. About 25 people still live there. I'm not sure when Telegan sold the land. It's a new owner in the last 20 or so years. The people who live there, though, they love it, and they love the isolation, and they love living in this little community. And I think a lot of people who lived in Pacifica a long time know that there was a woman there who was an artist, Mary Harris, very beloved by a lot of people. And she lived there by herself in one of the cabins at Shelter Cove until she was 100 years old. And she went up and down those stairs, and she loved living there. And, you know, this is all part of the new exhibit we have at the museum. So, you know, stop by and you'll see some interviews with people who live there and some pictures, a little bit, maybe a few more than we have here today, and to see about what it's like living there. Okay.
Okay. Now, are there any questions or comments? We hope to get a few people who've actually spent time in Shelter Cove, and they were excited about joining us, but then had conflicts and ended up not being able to come.
Jim?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. I've always been fascinated by that Shelter Cove area. I used to take my Segway tours up there to look down on it. We used to talk about that. It's got a great history, but I'm wondering, my question right now is what the future plan is for that area. Will that be completely closed off, or is the city planning to put in some better stairs or a trolley or something? Does anybody know what the future plan is for Shelter Cove?
Well, you know, it's privately owned by one person. The people who live there in those houses are all tenants. I don't believe the owner lives there. So it's one of those situations, I mean, it's like a little bit like Martin's Beach, where, you know, the owner owns all the land. And of course, the beach area technically is public, but in order to get to the beach area, you have to go through private land. So it's one of those sticky situations. I mean, there's a no trespassing sign on the stairs. So technically you know, he doesn't really want people going in and out. He doesn't really want the public going in and out. As far as the roadbed, I'm a little uncertain about that. Pat, do you know? I mean, or does anybody know who owns that roadbed? I'm not sure.
This is KP Judy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Catherine. I'm in Port Angeles, Washington, and I'm the third daughter of the Pacifica family. So Charlotte is my bestest eldest sister. And that roadbed, as far as I remember, my folks had exchanged the right-of-way above the Cove buildings, where the path now comes down from the hill above, from up by Mary Reedon's, and comes down. And that, my parents did end up actually getting that deeded to them, that particular part of the roadway. I do not recall whether they got the part of the roadway deeded from the water tank back over to Pedro.
I think, Chris, you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah, people park at the end of San Pedro there on Pedro Point, and there's still people that walk the road. It's like it gets really narrow. It's like a little single track path on the cliff, but that's generally where they park their cars, the people that live out there that do have cars, and they walk that path still. I mean, it gets treacherous at spots, but they either go up there and walk the stairs, or they walk out from the from the water tower on out towards the old little train depot spot there, you know?
I think
Can you
for,
guys hear me?
I think for a while, they actually had a vehicle on the other side, right? That the people who lived there had an old truck that they shared, and they would park, walk over, and then use this kind of community. Somebody told me it was a pickup truck, an old pickup truck that kind of went in and out from the roadbed down to the houses. That was a while ago, though.
Yeah, because I was thinking, like, what do they do about like refrigerators, stoves? You know, that's, you got to hire some movers to come down them stairs. It's crazy.
Yeah.
You know, some
You
kind
can-
of sled or something with a rope and a pulley.
You can bring a boat in on calm water, but it's a treacherous beach, and but you can get boats in there at calm
That's a good
tide.
idea.
And I don't know
Never
what they're
thought
doing
about
right
that.
now, but I know we used to bring things in, fish.
Oh. That's a good idea, though. I didn't think about that. No, it's the ocean.
But there is we're sitting on a potential problem here. If we get another storm like you were just showing pictures of, those people will be trapped and could very well be killed. And there's no way to get in there to help them by fire trucks or police cars, or I don't know, maybe a helicopter. No, a helicopter can't even land there. So
A helicopter could land up by where the water tower used to be. There's still that spot. I mean, they can land a helicopter there.
where is that spot?
It's right
when
behind the
you're looking at
largest
the
3-story
pictures-
home.
Yeah, it's in when you're facing the beach from the ocean, looking at Shelter Cove. If you were in the water, it would be on the left-hand side.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to just add one thing to those pictures of the 1960 storm. That was the only time in 20 years of living there that I saw water cascading over the big point at 4 o'clock that morning. It was actually coming up and over the big point.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Any other comments or questions?
Is it Catherine? I understand your mother was pregnant at the time. Is that correct?
She was, and she was a grown-up lady. She was about 46. And so it was a late pregnancy. And so my little sister was born shortly thereafter, within about a couple of weeks after the storm.
Oh, God.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, no, it doesn't rain, it pours.
My friend
Yeah, so
Amanda.
they made those farmer types pretty tough.
Wow.
Oh,
Can you
my
guys hear
sister's
me?
name is Mary Ann. Excuse me. I realized I should have said her name is Mary Ann.
That is amazing story. Thank you so much. Kristen, do you have anything else on this?
Yeah, no, just a friend of mine in high school, she lived out there. And she was saying sometimes during big storms, like the water would go under the house. You know, they had like a break wall in front, but if the water shot up really hard, that in between the floorboards, sometimes the water would come up, like during crazy storms. I'm like, I don't know how people could sleep with that. I would be freaked out that I'm going to get washed away or something, you know, but they did it. And she did it. She's like, yeah, during big storms, you know, water would be smashing against the house. You hear rocks rolling in the surf, and that's a bit much for me. That's it. That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, it was a noisy storm. You're right.
I could say something more about Shelter Cove.
Oh, yes. please
It
do.
was Mr. Tellegen that first excluded the public. Before that time, the public had been more or less invited and would pay a parking fee to enjoy the beach there at appropriate times. And I think all the owners since then have kept up the same policy of trying to keep the public out. Mr. Arno Roloff is the current owner. He's a developer. He presented a number of potential solutions to the Planning Commission for restoring a level walking access to the point, and was turned down. what part of it was that they wanted him to be responsible for the condition of the bluff above that path. And the top of the bluff was a paper street called Beau Rivage, or Beautiful View, I think, something like that. And one of the house owners at the top there had over irrigated their backyard. And when you look over there, you'll see it's like a big scoop in the face of the bluff has slid down, and that has made it more perilous. But anyway, the city doesn't want to be responsible for what happens to that from in the future. But I think was an unfair onus to try to put on Mr. Roloff's shoulders. So it's just been a standoff since then. That's all.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Terry. Okay, we're now going to move along to our third topic for today. And it also has to do with the ocean. Jane Tellini is now world famous, having been on This American Life a couple of weeks ago. Unfortunately, she wasn't feeling well today. And so her story of living on Esplanade and losing her house is not, she's not going to be able to talk about that in person, except she is going to be able to talk about it in person because my clever husband was able to record a bit from the This American Life episode, so we can share it today. There's just a couple of things I'd like to mention before we begin. A little bit of technical things. Oh, here, let's go back. So here we are with Esplanade, and you will notice that on the ocean side, there are no houses anymore. Many of us in Pacifica, all of us in Pacifica know that already. Just a bit of history. This is erosion rates. This is a map going or photograph going from north to south. And these are very high erosion rates on average, from about 1/2 foot a year that the cliff is moving landward to 2.5 feet per year. But as you'll hear from Jane, that's not the way it happens. It's not an orderly foot or two a year. This map shows what happened in the late 1990s. So here we have the distance that has been eroded over time and the elevation, and you can see that huge jump that happened in the late 90s when so much of the cliff was eroded.
So the shoreline is moving from right to left down to the zero which is a baseline point.
Yes, right. Okay, now we hope that the technology is going to work and that we'll be able to hear Jane.
All right, I'm going to try to share screen.
Yes.
So when people can see that. So this was an episode of This American Life, which aired on February 11th, and it's still available. You can listen to the whole thing. We've excerpted just a few parts from the beginning where Jane is asked to speak about her experience. Listen to this few minutes from This American Life.
Check one, apocalypse now-ish. Little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes on the hillside, little boxes all the same.
Pacifica, California is a community of about 40,000 people on the ocean, just south of San Francisco. This song that you're hearing, Little Boxes, it was written about the tract housing that was thrown up in neighboring Daly City after the Second World War. Those same tract houses went up in Pacifica.
There's a pink one and a green one and a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same.
Those tract houses are actually pretty nice, even if they are the same. And these days, there are newer, fancier houses too. Some tech types have moved in. But Pacifica is still mostly middle class, about 20% Asian, 20% Latino, 60% white. A beach town with famously great surfing and a Taco Bell that people call the world's most beautiful Taco Bell. But Pacifica is struggling with her own slow-moving apocalypse. Elise Spiegel explains.
For the first 7 years after Jane moved in, everything about her house was normal. The building itself wasn't particularly impressive. It was a modest 3-bedroom cottage. That worked fine for a single mom like her. And since the house had been built high on a cliff in the city of Pacifica, her view of the ocean was spectacular. Jane had always wanted to live by the sea. So even though the house had drained every cent from her bank account, for Jane, it was worth it. Every night she fell asleep to the sound of crashing waves. Or anyway, that was how it went for 7 gloriously normal years, until one February morning in 1998.
My bedroom was right on the ocean. It opened out onto the lovely little patio with a sliding glass door. And I was in the bedroom in my queen size bed, sat up, and my backyard was gone.
It was so strange. When Jane had gone to bed the night before, everything about the back of her house had been in order. And Jane's backyard was pretty big, not the kind that usually disappears in the middle of the night.
It had a patio in the back that was maybe 8 feet wide. Then it had ice plant that was maybe 25 feet. Then there was a fence that was really sturdy. And then on the other side of the fence, there was another 8-10 feet.
Jane couldn't understand it. Before, no wind, no earthquake. Maybe she was stuck in some strange lifelike dream?
It wouldn't register. And I went out of my bedroom and into the kitchen and kind of looked out the window back at my bedroom and realized that part of the bedroom was not attached to anything. The cliff was gone.
Was it literally like the sea crashing beneath your house?
Yes. Yeah, it was. My house was essentially, at least the bedroom part of it, was hanging pretty much in midair.
Looking back through her kitchen window at her now precariously dangling bedroom, the problem was perfectly obvious. The 70-foot tall cliff, which had supported her house, had quietly slid into the ocean while she slept.
Just kind of went, ooh, gently into the sea.
Jane knew 1998 was an El Nino year, which meant stronger storms and currents in her part of Northern California. She also knew that stronger currents would eat away at the bluffs beneath her house more quickly. But Jane and her neighbors hadn't been worried. Sure, in theory, El Nino could cause their homes to tumble into the ocean. But in their experience, theory rarely translated into practice, so it didn't seem real. In fact, 2 weeks earlier, Jane had had the whole street over for a raucous El Nino party.
And I told everybody to come, bring something, and wear flotation devices. So everybody had on water rings, inner tubes, life jackets.
Jane had worn a necklace of rubber duckies strung around her neck and carried a huge drink for most of the night. Together they all drank and danced and laughed, secure in the knowledge that though nature might be hazardous for some, they themselves were safe.
It was a great party.
But then here they were 2 short weeks later, and the laughably distant threat they'd mocked suddenly wasn't as laughably distant. Not to Jane, and not to any of her neighbors.
Down the block, the same thing was happening. Everybody was losing their backyards. The guy next door to me lost his hot tub, went over that was in his backyard. The other side of me, she lost her back porch. So there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
In the end, 10 houses had to be abandoned. Today, there are only odd-numbered houses on Jane's old street. I know this may seem like an extreme example, but most of us are living some version of this story, dancing and drinking as the world under our feet disappears. I certainly am. It's like we know something bad is coming, but it's so far away. And look.
I
Problems and temptations of now feel very pressing. The maybe possible future, very far away and unlikely to happen in our actual lifetime, until one day when suddenly the future is here and there's not much to do but take inventory.
Oh my God, the patio's gone, the picnic table's gone, the ice plant's gone.
So that was just a short clip, like less than 6 minutes of a 40-minute presentation. That's really most of what Jane talked about, but they continue to talk about the hazards of cliffside erosion and beachfront armoring for the rest of that episode. I will put the link to that chat. I'll put that link to that episode in the chat if you want to hear the whole thing. I highly recommend it. Let's see, Pat, do I go back to you or can you take it?
I think I claimed it.
Good.
Although Jane couldn't come today, we are very lucky because Barbara Toole O'Neill has joined us. Her house was on the other side of the road from Jane's. And so it survived. Barbara, if you just unmute yourself and talk to us.
I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My house was actually across from Jane's. And Jane was always full of interesting vim and vigor. The night that she talked about when she woke up, the people had been told to evacuate, and perhaps I just should say, you never kind of know what's going on, but it's a elevated marine terrace, and over the period from December 26th to February 22nd, I think, the rain never stopped. And the cliff, which is sand and compacted clay, became saturated, and it would peel off in feet sections. So some of the houses like Jane's had a backyard, and then they didn't. They lost 25 or 30 feet from, and February 22nd is when the rain stopped and you could see, and the land was just absolutely saturated. So it kept peeling away. None of the houses actually ever fell into the ocean, but back decks and other things were lost, and the houses had to be evacuated. And I, as a USGS researcher, as a private citizen, came around the day after, I think the second or third day, and said, you need to be ready. And he was just wonderful. He also had all kinds of maps that I'm sure exist somewhere that showed the history of that area and what it was before there were housing developments, and how things kind of got saturated where the water came from. It was wonderful. But on the personal level, you were talking before about you could hear the waves all night, and the wind started in November coming from the southwest, and it never stopped. And so there were bigger waves. And so probably starting somewhere around the 1st of December until I don't remember, when you went to bed, and if you had pictures on the wall, they rattled, and they rattled all the time. We had glass doors on a nice TV center thing, and the glass doors rattled, and it never stopped. And so the mental toll was pretty big. The people that lost their houses, they did get some recompense, but it was really, really hard. It was very difficult. Jane did have a party she talked about beforehand, but the night that she was told to evacuate, Jane is a wonderful person. She had a party with 15 people to come and help her evacuate. And when you looked at her house from the beach, about a third of it was undermined. You could see the drainage, you could see the sewer that went out the other direction. And the geologist came back and said, please watch and call the police right away if you hear anything. He was very concerned that house was going to go. It was just a very interesting time. But everybody, it went through a lot. People got, they went a lot of different places. A lot of the people on that side, that was their dream home, like Jane talked about. There was a gentleman down the street that converted the home to assisted care so he could take care of his wife. His house survived for a while, but it impacted everybody in very deep ways. And you just, you know, it doesn't happen. I think the picture you showed, and I'll stop in a moment. On average, you lose an inch a year on that cliff on average. But what happens is you lose in 20 inches or feet every 20 years or every 10 years as soon as there's a big storm. So it seems pretty stable for a very long time, and then whoop, it's gone. And it doesn't, there's no rocks or anything. It just disappears into the ocean. And it took over a year for the land to drain. So you could see water spewing out of the bottom of the cliff at low tide for over a year.
Thank you very much, Barbara. We're very lucky to have you join us.
Oh, thank you. It was a very much a life-changing event. And you know, when the utility showed up or the TV showed up, they were nice, but it, you know, it was a life-changing event, certainly.
Does anybody else have any comments? Just raise your hand like this is good.
I'll take an opportunity to jump in again. It's been mentioned and hinted at, and Barbara explained it in the very important distinction. In the audio clip from the show, Elise, it was the person who produced that show. I should have said her name and given her credit. Elise Spiegel was the producer who did the show, that segment with Jane and the rest of the parts. The distinction is between what we think of as coastal erosion from waves. Can you all see me? Most people think that the coastal erosion is happening from those big storm waves. And in fact, that can happen. Heavy storm surge can cut in at the bottom, at the toe of the cliffs. But when these big events happen, it's not usually from that at all. The distinction is when we've had rains, saturating rains, as Barbara said, the surface land becomes saturated and very subject to just starting to slide because it's got so much water in it. So what happens doesn't have to be associated with storm waves at all. There's two different ways that the cliff can get lost. And the idea that it can happen on fair weather a few days after a big rain, I think sometimes escapes notice. And we think, oh, well, we'll put lots of riprap, these enormous big boulders at the base of the cliff, and that'll protect us. Much of the erosion is unaffected by the waves at the bottom, and all that riprap will not help it. So that's a technical distinction, which to me seems really, really important as we talk about how we're going to try to protect the city against these types of hazards. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? I got a heads up this morning that actually the city council is going to be discussing this very issue, and I believe this next week. And there's been a report about the history of this area and what we are headed towards in the future. So if you want to look at the agenda for city council, they have more information from this report.
I found a picture, if you want me to share it, of the cliff looking from the south to the north when they were working on it after the houses were gone, or no, the houses are still there.
Thank you.
This is from a ResearchGate. It's from a website. If you can see it, I don't know that I can make it bigger, but this is, I think this one is Katie's house. This is near the RV park. And this is what they were putting riprap down. So this is one of the houses that survived for a few more years. And the city came and took all these houses down, as you know, in May. And you can see barely here, there's a piece of a fence dividing somebody's yards, but it went down. And it's this one or the next one that is Jane's house. So it's quite an event. It was quite an event. if I may, I thought I heard someone say that they had been here when Lindemar flooded.
Yes, in fact, we're going to have that person next. And
Okay,
I'm going to go to screen share, and it is Chris Offinger. Okay. I hope I did get the slide up that has your house in it somewhere in this. Otherwise, I apologize.
That's okay. I think this is looking down, when you're coming down Arguella, looking down towards Balboa and Anza. Yep. The cover shot.
Okay, would you just say advance or next if you want, when you want me to show something else?
Okay, could you advance the next photo? That's me on the corner with the red sleeves. And that's my two other best friends. I was 12. That's the corner of Anza and where Arguello and Anza meet. That was the deepest point. The water there was above the eaves on those houses at that end of Anza. It was crazy. There's that boat sticking up. Our neighbors had a pleasure boat that took up their whole driveway. That floated with the trailer attached and everything and crushed part of our porch and sunk into our lawn and was there for about 4 months before they could even get it removed. But yeah, so I guess I'll just tell everybody here, my name is Chris Hoffinger. My parents moved here in 1970. I was 6 months old. I've lived here pretty much my whole life. I lived in San Francisco for about 9 years and came back. And so I was 12 at this time. And that day was a crazy day. So growing up on Anza, I was on the northern end of Anza along Highway 1. So the southern end, close to where the Chevron station is on Lindemar and Highway 1, those houses, the water always filled up there, like halfway up their lawn during a big rainstorm. So I'll just start the day that it flooded. To start off, it poured rain for 3 days straight. It did not stop, like pouring downpours. So I was in school, and Yvette Smith lived at that house where this picture was taken from the angle. And they called her home on the announcement in her classroom. And they said, go home, Anza Drive's flooding. And everyone was like, oh man, your house is there. And I was like, no, it's only that other end of the house of the street always fills up. And then about 10 minutes later, Chris Offinger, your mother called, you need to get home, Anza is flooding right now. So I just remember walking home. So I walked down Crespi to Highway 1 and would walk the path to my house. Well, the little up ramp by the post office that goes up to Cabrillo School there to the top deck and all that, that was like a river. It was flowing about at least a foot deep, just flowing down the hill. And I remember seeing that. And then I walked down the path on Highway 1 and the water was like up to my knees the whole way. And that was like a little river flowing down. By the time I got to where my backyard was, it was almost up to my waist walking through the lowest point in my backyard. And I got up to the back of our house and the water was up to just to touching my house. I went inside and my mother and father were both home. And my dad was like putting everything that was worth value up into the upper closets at that point. And I remember opening the front door and my brother was out in the street. He was a total hot rod guy. You know, he was into hot rods. So he had a 69 Charger that he was building he was a teenage kid, 16 or 17. And it was already up to the windowsill on that thing. And it was up to the front porch. We lived at 983 Anza was my address. And the water was up to the first step on our porch. So we just started, my dad had us going like gangbusters, putting everything up. And then I remember hearing my mom scream, like this loud scream, and started crying. And I was like, what's going on? Went to the front door. And we had like a dark, 70s, 80s style carpet shag rug. Well, if you ever spilled any liquid on that, it gets dark and shiny. Well, it was like suddenly where the door was, it was just a big, dark, shiny area on the carpet, just slowly working its way into our house from the front door. And I remember my dad said, all right, I got to turn the power off and everybody has to get out. So we turned the power off. And we just had to get out of the house. We had to walk out and walk down the highway. He came back and picked us up in a station wagon. And we went to my brother's house, who was, he had an apartment on, he lived in the apartments on Adobe, right where the creek is right there, the ones that border the creek there. So we thought everything was okay. I mean, we knew it was flooding, but we're like, okay, we're safe for the night. Well, then all of a sudden we have police and firemen coming there because the water was coming over the bridge on Adobe. And I think it cracked too. The bridge cracked there also. It didn't wash out like Peralta, but it cracked and it started flooding the ground floor apartments there. They had water in the whole area, the complex. So we got evacuated from there. So my mom was like freaking out because there was still 4 of us living at home. So some of my brothers went to stay with a family, the Deschlers. They're a longtime Pacifica resident family. They went there. I went to the kid in the middle of that picture. I went to stay with them, the Oldhams on Lindemar Boulevard. And so we got there and we settled in. I'm like, what do I basically had a trash bag full of clothes. That was all I had. And so his mom let us go out that night. So we were like, hey, let's go exploring, because we were 12-year-old boys. It was like a Huck Finn story. Water was everywhere. We seen people with kayaks and stuff, like kind of checking stuff out. So we walked down to Lindemar Shopping Center, and the whole shopping center and park and the Samtrans lot, that was like a giant lake. It was completely full. We walked down towards Highway 1 and we crossed the boulevard from the shopping center. We literally had to hold on to each other because the current was so strong, we almost got washed out to the beach. We were crossing, and I remember a giant possum was coming by us and like rained up on us, and we were like, what the heck? Let's get out of here. So we went to the Chevron station there, and that corner house, the one that borders it on Highway 1, there was like 3 sections of fence that were stacked on each other, and their fence was always down for like 5 years. They just never had their fence fixed. And we walked over to that, and we kind of had to jump on it, and we used it like a Huck Finn raft. We stood on it, broke off a fence pole, and we pulled down Highway 1 to my backyard because the water was so high that we couldn't touch the ground. So and for us, as like I said, as 12-year-old boys, it was like an adventure time. Like, man, we're rafting on this thing down to my house. And we jumped off in my backyard, and it was over our heads. We literally had to swim in from Highway 1 to where we finally got to touch our feet, like pretty close to my house. And we went inside, and there was already water up to our waist. Luckily, my dad, I was a stupid kid. I didn't even think about it. My dad was smart, turned the power off so nobody would get zapped going in there. But I just remember opening my bedroom door, and the wind was blowing so hard that it was like, it looked like a whirlpool in my room. Our refrigerators were tipped over. It just reeked like stinky water. And so we had to swim back out, went back up, got back to his house, covered in, because the pumps, the drainage pumps backed up. The whole system broke. That's why they say it flooded, because it couldn't pump out the water fast enough. And the creek was overflowing. Just that whole Lindemar Basin filled up. And so we went home, showered up. And then that next day, I remember walking down there, and it was just complete devastation. And it was weird. There was this weird silty mud and dirt that was everywhere. Like it was like about 4 inches thick inside your house, on the street. It was almost like it felt like grease because it was so smooth. Yeah, we called it flood mud. It was on everything. My friends had all our photos, anything you had in storage. If it had flood mud on it, they recommended you throw it away because they're worried about people getting, what is that? Like hepatitis and stuff like that because it was backed up sewage water. I remember we're standing at Arguello and Balboa's where the Gonzalez family's house was. They're still there. And I remember there was a crawdad from the creek in the mud right on his walkway up into his house. And we were just like, we thought it was the coolest thing. Wow, there's a crawdad here. We're young kids, but it was just the devastation, the utter ruin of everything. Like it was crazy. Our lives were so upturned from that. Like a lot of people went and stayed the night of the flood. Pedro Valley School, which is no longer there, opened up as a Red Cross emergency center, and they had cots and stuff like that. A lot of families went and stayed there. Terra Nova opened up as an emergency center. They had families staying there. Luckily, I had friends to go stay with, but I lived with them for like 6 months. Our house was uninhabitable, so our family was completely broken up. My parents stayed in the city. My cousin stayed in our house to guard it at night because there were people going in to the abandoned homes and going up in all the upper closets and stealing stuff and selling it. It was crazy. But it was a weird time for a young boy. It was fun in the aspect that I could do whatever I wanted. It was like, yeah, I'm living at my best friend's house. But on the other flip side of it, my family was broken up. I couldn't see my parents all the time. Everything I had up to that point was ruined. Most of our family photos, we had a bunch of home movies that my brothers had made. All of it was destroyed. And it was crazy, Yeah, there's Peralta Bridge. When I went for school at Cabrillo at that time, for 7th and 8th grade, you had to go to Lindemar. So being on Anza, we had to walk and cross that thing every day. So we would walk down in that trench and back up, and back up and walk over to Lindemar School. And it was crazy, yeah. And then there was the Velez tragedy too. That happened during that storm where the house slid down and those children were trapped and they suffocated. I mean, that was the worst storms I've ever seen. Like I said, the day when it flooded, it rained like pouring rain for 3 days straight. And it was scary. As a young boy, I was pretty scared. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask.
Do you still live there, Chris? I'm
No,
curious, Chris, do you still live in that house?
No, my parents got divorced right after the flood.
Oh.
Which, yeah, it was just a tumultuous time because even after that, my father struggled to get our house together. Then right after that, him and my mom divorced. And they had their divorce agreement was to sell the house when I was 18. So it was flood, then bam, then my parents were divorced. It was crazy. It was like a series of unfortunate events, But they sold the house in 1988. But I'm up on Crespi now. I'm not in the flood zone. But I did live on Flores for a while. To be honest though, I love living in that area. When I was a kid, we would look over the fence, see what was going on at the rest area when they still used to have bonfires there. We'd hop the fence. We knew everybody. It was the most wonderful place. I feel truly blessed to have gotten to grow up here, with being able to go up Old Coast Road as a kid, going to beach parties at the beach, just having the ocean right there. It was great. Couldn't ask for anything else. But with that, nature is we can't stop it.
Gloria.
Hello, Gloria. I see you got your hand up.
Okay. Just to add to that, my husband he passed away a few years ago, but he was in the Pacifica Fire Department. And talking about the flood, I could hear from the receiver because we had to have the receiver in our homes. Basically, the fire department didn't have that many firefighters. And so we relied on volunteers as well. And so anyway, everybody who was a volunteer or a hired Pacifica fire personnel had to have a receiver. Anyway, I'd hear the receivers going on and them talking back and forth about how whoever showed up first in Lindemar, they said, oh my God, we need a boat. It's flooded, and I'm going, oh God. And my son was going to Lindemar school at the time, but he was being bused. But believe it or not, we used to have a school bus system. And we lived in Rockaway.
Is Paul and Jeff your sons?
Who?
Paul and Jeff?
Yeah.
Yes, I know those guys. I went to school with them. Me and my brother.
Right. Anyway, they were the last kids to get on that bus, and that bus driver left in a hurry and was able to cross the bridge that you're talking about before it broke. So that was a little scary for him. But Rockaway Beach Avenue, just like you were explaining or describing, it was like a big river. And it was hard for those kids to come up the street. I don't know if we're going to the mudslide issue, but when we did have the mudslide and the kids got killed and everything, that really hit the fire department. And many of the firefighters, including my husband, Gary, they needed to seek, they had mental health counselors to help whoever the city provided that. So I was really impressed by that because many requested and it was done. So that was a good thing for the city to provide, but it really traumatized some of the firefighters. So, and they were there for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one. The people that volunteered to help us all out, it was amazing how much our community worked together.
Yeah.
That was one of the greatest things, like Pedro Valley, the school there, everybody that was volunteers there were super, super nice. And we were getting food and stuff there for a while. I was living in, we would always joke and call, like flood clothes or whatever, we were hobos, but hey, you know what? Everybody worked together, and it was glad, there wasn't any more, tragedies like the back of the valley in Lindemar, because it was pretty treacherous. I think, Jim, did you have your hand up?
Okay, was that a hand up, Jim Hellberg?
Yeah, that was me. Thank you. I saw those pictures of the bridge, and I can't figure out where that bridge is or was. What bridge is that? Is that the one over San Pedro Creek now, or is that somewhere else?
It's over San Pedro Creek. It was a tunnel, and it's right by the old San Pedro Road. Like, so if you're coming up San Pedro Road, the old San Pedro Road to Peralta, if you turned left right there towards Lindemar Boulevard, you immediately cross over that bridge. If you turn right, you're going towards Lindemar School and Shamrock Ranch.
Okay, so it's not Highway 1, not the Highway 1.
No. It was in front of my house. So I grew up on the corner of Peralta and Bauer. So right there on that corner. So if you know where I'm sure you know where it is, Jim. It's on Peralta and Bauer, right there. That's where the bridge is. So, I mean, after that, they did a flood control project, to kind of prevent that from happening again. So they widened it up, and but it took a long time. So it was it was a couple of years before they were able to repair that bridge, and it involved a lot of people having to go a long way around. My mom was there at the time. It was a little traumatic for our family, because my dad had a major stroke and beforehand. And so my poor mom was dealing with that, and then the flood our house was not flooded, our garage was, but we'd had to put sandbags around the kitchen door so that the water wouldn't enter the kitchen. I can't talk about the Adobe bridge, but yeah, that Peralta bridge took a long time to rebuild.
It was like that for a few years.
Yeah. And then there's a culvert that runs from like where Lindemar School is, kind of under, from there, that goes into the creek under Bauer. And I think that kind of came up and flooded. We used to have some vacant lots behind our property there where our farm used to be. And that kind of came up. So the flooding was coming in two different directions from the creek. It was coming from behind and also the creek. Yeah. And that creek rose so quickly. It was, I wasn't there, but my mother, I was on the phone with my mom, and it was really scary because the creek came up so fast. The amount of rainfall was unbelievable.
Yeah, like I said, when the water came in our house, it was, when I got home, it was at the first step. And then within, it seemed like maybe a half hour, it went up another step over our porch and then up to the door and in the house in like 20 minutes to a half hour. It just came up. It was crazy.
Yes, Chris.
I just want to say thank you for having me. This was really nice.
Well, thank you for participating. I mean, it was a traumatic thing for your family, but thank you so much for sharing. That area, of course, those of us who are really interested in the deep history of our geography here, that used to be Lake Matilda back, in the days of the Indians and so forth. And then when the Ocean Shore Railroad went in, they built a berm right in front of it. And I guess Andy Alstead just decided to fill it in with some dirt and everything would be fine, but not.
No, my dad had to run a sump pump every year. Pretty much during winter, he'd have to put it on like once or twice a week. And in that one of those pictures where I told you you're looking down Arguello towards Balboa Nyanza, a friend of mine still owns a house there, and he has a natural spring that comes up underneath his house. So he has to run a sump pump all year round. It's crazy. Lindemar.
Yeah, I think that was Catherine Patka. Did you call? Do you want to say something, Catherine?
No, I just wanted to say, hey, Jer, hey, Deidre.
Hey.
and Chris, that the personal aspect, heavy duty.
Thank you.
I think what I'm going to say is I'll just keep the meeting on, but it's not rude to just leave the meeting whenever you're comfortable doing it. If anybody has any other things they want to share with one another, we'll just kind of have open mic time for another 10 minutes or whatever. But thank you so much for attending. And thank you all for making your personal contributions in addition to the people we had who were officially scheduled here. It's a beautiful place to live, but there are hazards here in Pacifica, just like everywhere else. And thank you all for coming.